Dr. Chris Labos joins us, cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology and a regular contributor here on CJAD. By the way, you can catch him every Sunday. He's with Joanne Vrakas on Weekends with Joanne, 7:20 a.m. I want to start with this story because, when you see the word ultra-processed, Chris, I think to myself, didn't we already know this? But this story ties into something, we may have already known it. What we didn't know, perhaps, was just how bad it was. And I'm talking about ultra-processed food. So first of all, can you just give us, when we talk about ultra-processed foods, what are we talking about specifically?
Well, that is actually a much more complicated question than you realize, because there is a lot of debate in the literature about how we define the term, and should we be a little bit more specific, because what is an ultra-processed food? Is peanut butter an ultra-processed food? So, you get into these arguments, is bread an ultra-processed food? Because you are technically taking something that is quote-unquote natural, like wheat, and you are changing it in some way. So there is this division that we talk about in the research about natural food, about products like salt and sugar, and then processed and ultra-processed foods. The problem is you have different groups and different organizations and different research consortia that kind of define them a little bit differently. So there is a bit of gray zone there into what we mean when we say ultra-processed foods. Basically, what we are referring to is junk food. So basically, food that is being manipulated in some way, specifically the addition of things like salt, sugar, trans fats, which really don't see that much anymore, but stuff that is purposefully being made unhealthy by the addition of extra products. That's what we typically mean by ultra-processed foods.
Okay, so I think, as I said off the top, I think we know these foods, at least everything is kind of this everything in moderation approach would be okay, but for people who kind of live on this stuff, there is a concern.
Yeah, absolutely, because this stuff is fundamentally unhealthy, and the big issue that we have in our society is that most of us don't prepare our own food anymore. Most of us eat out, we go to restaurants, we buy pre-made foods, and that's the real problem, is that when you are buying pre-packaged food or pre-prepared food, this food tends to be very high in salt, very high in sugar. It tends to be fundamentally less healthy than the food that you would make for yourself at home, because when you're cooking at home, you sort of know you shouldn't take the salt shaker and start pouring it into your food. But then you go out for a pizza, and you come away from it and you're like, oh my God, I'm so thirsty. Well, that's because they've added so much salt into the pizza. So I think a more helpful way to look at it, and what's probably more useful for people to know, is that try not to eat out, try not to buy prepackaged foods, try as much as possible to cook at home, because even if you're not a good cook, the stuff that you're eating is going to be fundamentally healthier than anything you're buying from somewhere else.
Okay, but with respect to, someone who, whatever, as you just said, is rushed, this is just how they live. I mean, is there a better or a worse when it comes to this kind of stuff? Like, what should you be looking for, or is it just all bad?
Well, no, it's not all bad. It really depends on where you're getting your food from, right? So this is where you have to start reading food labels. So if you're at the pharmacy and you're buying a pre-prepared meal of some kind, well, it depends what that is. And this is where you really have to start checking the food labels to see how much salt, how much sugar is in there. The problem with food labels in Canada is they are notoriously hard to decipher. Now, there has been a push recently to try to update these food labels. I mean, the government was supposed to do this back in 2015, like Jane Philpott, when she was health minister, was pushing this. That never really got off the ground for a multitude of reasons. But so there is this push now to sort of change the food labels, that when you go there, you can look right on the front and identify, is this high in salt, is this high in sugar, is this unhealthy? Ergo, should you put it back on the shelf? So it requires a little bit of effort on your part, but you can find healthy stuff that's out there. You just have to be able to decipher now and realize that 300 milligrams of sodium, actually quite a bit, but most people just don't know that off the top of their heads. You need sort of like a big red warning label that says high in salt. Maybe not the best idea.
Again, but that does put the onus on eventually on the consumer, right? We now have to become experts as to how much salt is too much, how much sugar is too much. That seems like a pretty big challenge.
It is, and I think that's the issue that people are realizing, is that you can't just give people the raw facts and expect them to figure it out. That's just, it's unreasonable to expect consumers to do this when you're going grocery shopping. And that's why this label change is really, I think, about a decade overdue at this point. It really does have to change so that you can identify the stuff that is good for your heart, bad for your heart. If you have kidney failure, stuff that you should be avoiding, because it's hard. And unless you have specialized consultations with like a nutritionist or a doctor or somebody, you're not going to know how to do this, and most people are not going to invest the time to make it happen.
And then the other half of the story is beyond, kind of letting people know that this is not the best thing you could be doing. It gets worse because there is now apparently, we're finding out, an increased risk of early onset colorectal cancer. We wonder where all that was coming from for younger and younger people, but we're tying this to that as well?
Yeah, so that was the most recent research that has come out. So this is, these are associations, so you always have to be a little bit careful about drawing too firm a conclusion. But we have been seeing an increase in colorectal cancer amongst young people, and in research, young people is defined as under the age of 50. But this is a global phenomenon. We're not really seeing an increase in Canada very much. A lot of this increase is being driven when you look globally, especially in other parts of the world. And a lot of it there is being driven by the fact that a lot of these places are becoming more and more westernized in their dietary patterns. They're eating more and more junk food, more and more McDonald's. Not that I want to lay the guilt, on one specific restaurant chain, but that's the issue. So as they adopt a more and more unhealthy lifestyle, you're seeing an increase in chronic diseases, heart disease, but also a lot of cancer. And a lot of it is being driven now by colorectal cancer. That's why you're seeing these headlines about colon cancer increases globally, which is a problem, but not necessarily something that's affecting us here in Canada. That being said, if you start eating unhealthy, a lot of stuff is going to start to go wrong in your life.
Of course, it would also, be worth mentioning that as things get tougher, financially, for example, when you're drawn to these foods because they're cheap, right? Then we're probably going to get into the same kind of situation where other people are finding themselves in now anyway.
Yeah, go grocery shopping. Try to buy fruits and vegetables. It is really expensive. We have consistently across the research always shown one thing. Your socioeconomic status, meaning your financial affluence, is a big driver of multiple health conditions. And it's not just because when you have money, you can buy medical care. It's because when you have money, you can eat healthier. You can afford to go out and buy, the more expensive stuff, buy fresh food, eat, freshly cooked meals, as it were. It is a problem. We always talk about how people eat, are unhealthy. We're rising rates of obesity. And, a lot of it is society. A lot of it is culture. A lot of it is how our society has changed over time. We're more sedentary. But for a lot of people, they eat unhealthy because they can't afford to eat healthy. And unless you can do something to make food cheaper or have a sugar tax or something to sort of equalize that price differential, there is going to be a strong economic incentive for people to eat junk food. And that is a problem that is not unresolvable. Like, we can do it. There are programs in place that help. We just have to sort of double down on them and make them more widespread.
I mentioned off the top of the show today just something completely different, saying I remember being in Mexico a year or two ago, and you walk into a store there, if you wanted to buy a box of cookies or something, there's a giant, call it a warning label, if you will, but letting people know this product has excessive sugar or excessive fat or excessive salt, and it's not small. It's a big part of the packaging because people clearly are unaware, and I don't think it's a whole lot different here, but we've not gone to that extreme here.
No, and that is what Health Canada is really debating right now about the food label changes. So if we could do something like that, I think that would make a big difference. But, it's very hard to change these sorts of things. Yeah. And, part of it is justifiable. The companies have to change their labeling. They need time to adapt. Fair enough. But at a certain point, it has to happen, and we have to bite the bullet, because right now, most of our food labeling is about marketing, not about science. It's not easy to extract the relevant information unless you go there with, your reading glasses and a magnifying glass to try to figure out what's in the food you're actually eating.
But I will point out, so you're a doctor, you know this kind of stuff, right? When you go food shopping, do you actually read, and do you know if you're looking at an ingredients label, right? Oh, this one has X number of grams of sugar or salt. That's too high for me. Do you know what that number is? Do you actually do that?
Yeah, I do a little bit, and I look at it, and I look at the percentages, and I have a rough estimate, and so I sort of know. But you'd be surprised, like ketchup, mustard, stuff, you'd be like, oh, these are just condiments. No, a lot of them have a lot of salt in there. It's not good for you. So you really got to go digging for it. It's not always intuitively obvious.
Great. That's more good news when we needed some good news. All right, Dr. Labos, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You take care.
It's just not that easy, right? It should be so easy. He mentioned mustard, for example. And again, I hope this is true. Like someone mentioned, or I saw this somewhere, where ketchup, right? You think ketchup, bunch of tomatoes, good, throw it, tastes great. A lot of sugar in ketchup, right? Do you even think about that? Do you even know that? Who's ever looked at a ketchup label and went, oh, you know what? It's got 22 grams of sugar per every two. No, but there you go. We're a long way away from that even beginning to change, I think, at least here.
Seasoned gamer or just video game curious? This Week in Gaming is the podcast for you. We break down the latest in the world of video games, from basics to beyond. The hottest gaming news, insight, and industry leaders and more, weekly. Join me, Naomi Kyle, and stay ahead of the game with all the latest updates, even if you're a total newbie. Stream This Week in Gaming on the free iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.